Dual agency could be in a couple different ways. So dual agency could be one agent. It's always one firm. Always one firm. It could be one agent at the same firm. It could be two agents at the same firm. It could be one buyer with one firm and one listing with one firm, right? In this case, we have a buyer who is not with our firm, or is, I'm sorry, signed with our firm. We have a listing that is, does it say if it's okay?
It doesn't say anything about the seller.
It doesn't say. So they're just asking us, based on the information given,
Yeah.
what do we need? And the answer is what?
Written from both.
Written dual buyer agency agreement, written dual buyer agency agreement. Because he has one in writing,
Yeah.
he has to amend his to say dual is cool. The listing agent has to have in writing, or the seller has to have in writing that they are cool with listing. So if we look at our options, which one does that apply to?
D.
A, oral approval, no. So the oral approval is out. So the next three are written, written, and written. So written authority act as a dual from both the seller and the buyer before showing the property. Yep. Written authority before the buyer and written authority from the buyer for the agent to act as a dual agent, and oral, nope. And then D, written authority to act as dual agent from both the seller and the buyer no later than the time the agent presents an offer. Also not true. When we need to have it in writing before we go show this property. Everybody follow that?
So you could have dual agency, and I just picked up on this from what you were saying before. You could potentially have dual agency, two agents, and not designated.
Yes.
Yeah.
100% true. Because to have dual agency could be me being the dual agent, right? Could be I've been authorized as a dual agent, you've been authorized as a dual agent, boom, two agents, dual agency. Or the better and more protective option is if we're going to have two agents, designated agent, designated agent.
And if that situation came up just naturally, because you got 147 agents in that office, it probably comes up from time to time. Is it best practice or is it common practice, and that's probably two different questions, that you would go ahead and make it designated? Because otherwise you've got two referees and you're both freaking useless.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, it does vary case by case, but really the idea, the biggest problem, and it's not really a problem, but the biggest liability from a designated agent practice is great, you've got a buyer agency, you've got a seller and a listing agency. If I am the one by policy allowed to designate, let's say I'm the broker in charge, and by policy the broker in charge does the designating, I have to make sure you know nothing about her or the seller, and she knows nothing about you and the buyer. Because if you do, we can't do designated, well, at least not with you two.
Yeah.
I might have to get other brokers.
Yeah. And Mr. I've been representing this buyer, driving him around for the past month, is not going to be real freaking happy about this.
You got it.
Yeah.
So, and there's that fine line of, we like dual's nice and open, designated gets a little more restrictive, but designated is actually the most protective for everybody. It just has to follow certain procedures. You can, in fact, have a policy that says, I allow my brokers to self-designate. I don't have to designate you, I allow you to designate. Do you know anything about the seller? No, then you can designate yourself as a buyer agent. Do you know anything about the buyer? No, you can designate yourself as a buyer agent or listing agent.
So
I just have to be on the table, and because anything you did, I'm responsible for. So if you lied, I'm on the hook for that. So it's really difficult and puts a lot more liability on the people doing the designating.
So in practice then, as an agent, it's probably in your best interest, if it's not your personal listing, it's just a listing of the office, to just try and know as little as possible about the seller in all
Ideally.
cases. So
Yeah.
that if a buyer wants to see it, you're gold.
If I'm not literally having conversations with the seller, I don't need to know anything about
And
it.
I don't want to.
Yeah, I don't want to know anything about it because it could compromise my ability to make money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't be designated because now I'm privy to information that I shouldn't be. Exactly.
Is that the most common way that comes up?
Usually. Yeah, and especially, like I said, it can vary between firm size and a lot of other variables, but firm size is one of the biggest things because if it is a large firm, it's a high probability that I don't even know how many listings we have right now. I get a call on 123 Main Street, I have to look up who's listing it. I don't know. More or less anything about it. And then the other side of that is, if I'm in a small one-room firm and there's three of us and you have all your information and files laying out on your desk and on the wall and everywhere, what's the probability that I didn't see something that maybe I shouldn't have?
Yeah.
And so how can you, as a broker in charge or whomever's doing the designating, defend, oh yeah, he didn't know anything about the seller? That's right there. How did he not know anything about it?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, like how, yeah, because you can't really miss that. I mean,
And that's where, as broker, who again, the designating party carries a lot of liability and chooses to pay.
but you'll have an agency agreement as a buyer with your client, and then they want to go see a house. The first thing you're going to look at is who's got it listed, and do you then need to do anything before you show it?
So, and actually, I think if I'm correct, that gets into scenario 2.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's a great question, because in scenario 1, in the gray box on the top, he had a written agency agreement, she had a written listing agreement. When both are in writing, we can't do anything until they're amended in writing. And I'm willing to bet that scenario 2 is where a broker reviews a working real estate agent brochure, prospective buyer is reluctant to enter, meaning we are now going to go into an oral buyer agency agreement. And then the dual agency is not mentioned. After the broker shows the buyer several properties listed with broker's competitors, the buyer expresses particular concern to want to see one of the firm's listing. The broker's firm had previously executed a written listing agreement with the seller, but that agreement did not specify the firm to act as a dual. So same scenario, she's listed with the firm. She says, I don't need this dual thing, I don't understand it. He has an oral buyer agency agreement that does not authorize dual agency.
But she can orally say it's okay because his is oral at this point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now his buyer wants to see a listing with the firm, making it dual agency, but we don't have permission to act as dual agents. His agency agreement is oral. So orally, hey, this makes it a dual agency. Let me tell you how that works. We're going to talk about sports, right? Go over the conversation, make sure they're familiar with the dual agency situation. Go back to the seller and say, hey, we've got someone from our firm who's representing a buyer who would want to show your house, which therefore would make this dual agency. Are you okay with that? Yes, bring them on. Yes, we've talked about it. Yes, we've authorized it. Orally, we can make that happen.
You can show it, but before you get to an offer, everything's gonna have to be.
Very true.
written,
And
written.
ultimately, as we said, and this is actually a recap of Steve's conversation with before the break, he and I, all of these are done at the onset. We don't do anything from the day we are hired without an agency agreement. In this capacity as an oral buyer agent, I can do the working real estate agent brochure, go over that with you, and act as your agent for an indeterminate amount of time and never do another piece of paperwork until you're ready to make an offer. And before we make an offer, I have to have it in writing, just like everybody else, my agency agreement and all the required documents and everything else before I can write that offer to purchase.
And would you also need an amended one with the seller in that case before you present the offer?
If the seller has not authorized dual agency, I would also...
Yeah, they've orally,
Yeah. So, and that's ultimately his buyer agency agreement dictates how we can show this house. If he has an oral buyer agency agreement, I can get oral permission. If he has a written buyer agency agreement, we have to, in writing, amend her original listing agreement to say she's okay with dual agency.
Yeah.
And that is all that's being shared with you on page 175. On page 6.
So in practice, when you get into, and whether,
Thank
so
you.
if you're a buyer and you want to hire, I'm gonna hire you to be my buyer's agent, and I say, I do or don't want, well, your first thing when I say, here's the list of 10 houses I wanna see, your first action is going to be figure out who they're listed with, and if any are listed with your firm, you gotta figure this piece out before you can really do anything.
Yeah, if none of them are listed with my firm,
Then you should
I'm your
buy
buyer's agent. Let's roll.
Yeah.
But the
Either
moment you
orally
want to
or-
see
either
something
orally
with,
or an agency, depending on what
Exactly.
you agree to, but if it's with your firm, that's the stop, time out, let's figure out what we got before we move on.
which also alludes to that conversation we talked about in one of the previous classes where we have an open house, right? Her house is listed with you, and I'm a new agent. I want to go get me some buyers on that listing. So I'll hold your open house for you, and you walk in, and I'm like, great, I could be your buyer's agent. Except I'm not. I have to be a dual agent. I can't be your buyer's agent. Buyer's agent means I will represent you
Because your firm.
buying another property. If you're buying a listing with my firm, it's a dual agent. I'm not your buyer's agent. I am some flavor of dual agency, either designated or dual.
but you can still be designated, because just because you're covering the open house for it doesn't necessarily mean you know any confidential information from the seller, so.
And designated is still dual.
Yeah,
And that's
no,
the
I get
point.
that.
No,
I get that. I get
I'm saying
Yeah.
that for everybody, because
Yeah, yeah.
that is you cannot have designated agency without it being
Yeah.
dual. So, and they may ask you that, hey, is this a designated, this is a, you know, we have a designated situation, what kind of agency is it? It has to be dual. And that's the case with the open house. You can't be their buyer's agent because you're representing the seller the day you showed up. You're gonna be a dual agent, so we have to have that conversation from the get-go. Yeah.
Like for the average buyer, is like this level of knowledge, like, we're gonna be mostly explaining all this to them on the fly as we go along. They're not gonna know anything about this pretty much. Not
No.
Okay.
And honestly, most of the time, and this is another reason that buyer agency is very popular, because everybody thought, no matter who they call, that agent would work for them. Hey, I'm gonna call the sign and that agent will help me. No, that agent's helping the seller. So we always have to have a conversation of who do I work for when you talk to me, and who do you want to work for you? Do you want me to work for you? Do you need someone else to work for you? Are we okay to have me do both? What is that? And that's what the Working Real Estate brochure exists for, is to tell them all their options. It could be buyer agent, it could be a listing agent, it may become dual or designated dual. Here's the options, we're gonna choose one.
Do people normally like really read it, or they kind of skim through it? Like
Some will read it more than others. I think honestly, in my experience over the years, people rely on us to explain it, which is why we have spent the better part of 4 hours going over it.
And that's why they test you so much on that?
And that is why they test it so much. Again, the Real Estate Commission exists to protect the consumers. If we're not competent to have this conversation and understand this very fluidly, how are we gonna relay it to the Joe Blow consumer who buys a house once every 10 years? Yes, ma'am.
Let's say you are doing the opening for somebody else,
Mhm.
and you have a buyer that comes in and wants to buy it. And what do you do? What would you do? Would you like?
So if I am, if
would
she,
you do it as a
First off,
seller?
they have an agent.
Would you
Yeah.
do it as a seller's agent, or are you gonna do it, are you gonna say, okay, here's my, I'm explaining everything to them about
Yeah.
their options? Or would you aim for being a dual agent so you get paid something?
well, ultimately, if they wanna buy the house that I'm in, I'm a firm believer in everybody having a coach. I think that in a transaction, most consumers do not do it very often. I think it's beneficial to have an agent represent you and coach you. So in my perspective, you either need to be a buyer's agent or a listing agent so that someone can coach you. In my world, because we're a large firm, that being dual agent is very common. So I would rather see it be a designated agent where I don't know anything about the seller. Welcome to the open house. Here I can tell you about the property because I can give you what's in MLS. I don't know the seller, I don't know their names, I don't know their circumstances. I would be happy to be your buyer's agent, and if I have the ability to designate myself as your buyer's agent, I would do that. And
Okay.
rather be your designated buyer's agent, because then I could coach you, and I would call the listing agent and say, hey, I have a client, you have a client. If we are, by our policies and procedures, able to designate ourselves and everything is kosher and the broker in charge is okay with it, you be their coach, I be their coach. It's dual agency, but it's designated so everybody has a coach.
So, I mean, I know this sounds detailed, but let's just pretend like this is happening, and they wanna buy it now before somebody else buys it.
Mm.
So what are you gonna do?
You can, in fact, and this is actually that same case study where somebody walks in there and they may very well say, hey, I don't need an agent. I just need you to write this offer right now. I want this house before somebody gets it. You can say, great, mark the brochure where you understand that I work for the seller. I'm gonna be operating as a seller sub-agent. I will be happy to fill out this offer and a purchase, but I know that I'm doing it as the seller's agent. I am not your coach, I am not representing you. I will relay whatever terms you want me to relay in this offer to purchase.
So if it was really immediate, like they knew they wanted to buy it, you would represent the seller at that point.
I would have a
rather than-
conversation with the buyer that says, do you want me to be, kind of your designated dual agent?
Or do you need some
do you just want me to slap this thing together as me representing the seller?
Okay, well, let's pretend like they wanted some coaching. What do you do then?
I'd have to tell them, hey, I can't coach you. If I work for the seller, I can't offer you advice. You're welcome to talk to an
No, I mean,
attorney.
you're just showing the house.
Oh, if I'm just showing the house, they can look at the house. I'm not coaching.
Well, in our scenario, it was her listing, you just covering the open house, and so you could still be her designated buyer's agent. You'd sign it on the spot.
It
write
also
the offer.
depends too. Again, my preference might be different than real life. You might be okay with, hey, I'll be both sides. I'll be the dual agent. You walk in, as long as you understand, as long as you're okay with me being the dual agent, I can sit here and write this offer. I can call. What do you want to write?
But isn't it already
But
listed
I
at
can-
that
Well,
point though?
that's what I wanna know is really the logistics of it, like, are you gonna whip out a purchase agreement right then?
Not until I've gone over the Working Real Estate brochure and had the conversation as to whether they want me to be their agent.
Okay, what if they want you to be a designated agent, then what do? And you're in the house hosting this,
If I have the ability to be the designated agent.
right?
then I could. If I know anything about the seller, I
All
could
right,
not
let's pretend like you didn't
be
know
a
anything
designated.
about the seller.
If in my policies and procedures I'm allowed to self-designate, I could, in fact, designate myself as their agent, and now all of a sudden I am the designated dual agent for the buyer.
Okay, so you don't have to make a phone call to the firm, and you don't have to.
Depends on your.
It depends
Depends
on
on
the
the
policy.
policies and procedures.
The policies and procedures of the firm will indicate who has the ability to designate,
Okay,
and what does that look like, what does that have to be approval. A lot of firms will leave it as a broker in charge having to do it. But for example, in this firm, we have a lot of teams, and each team kind of has their own lead broker.
I see.
And so they often have a structure where there's a lead broker who does a lot of listings, and a couple people that help them with listings, and then there's several buyer's agents that work all the buyer leads. So in essence, they are fielding it all, and as the team as the team lead, I can give them authorization to designate. You're handling all the listings. You can ensure that those buyer's agents are getting leads that they are not aware of the seller. I would give them permission to designate.
Oh, okay.
So I can do that. I just have to be trustworthy. I have to trust them, because ultimately I'm on the line as their BIC, that they are in fact designating properly and not compromising
You
the
can
situation.
verbally tell them
I have to have it in the policy. It has to be a written policy. It's,
What-
every firm has a written policy that says who in the firm can be the designator.
that. So if you're head of the team and you're the designator.
I have a
you
policy
can-
that says they can do that.
You, and that person's in the house, and they've got a person that wants a designated agent,
Mhm.
buyer's agent, then you can,
Myself or that agent could designate, because as long as either of us had the ability to designate, then we could make it happen.
okay.
That's on the other hand. No? We good?
I was thinking through the scenario where you were only gonna just write it up and send it, and they weren't really wanting to get into an agency agreement with you.
That happens.
So the house is already listed at that point, clearly.
Mhm.
It's listed by somebody in your firm.
Mhm.
So then you're gonna call them up and say, look, I'm gonna send you this offer, but we're not in an agency agreement. Are you gonna share your commission with me, or how does that discussion go?
So the
You're
commission,
bringing them a viable buyer, potentially, an offer,
yeah, so all the commissions go into the firm.
yeah.
My position in the transaction dictates how much of that commission the firm will share with me, which is in my independent
But
contractor.
if you're not in, in the independent contract, but not in the agent, so it's not coming.
Yeah, because if it's listed with the firm, 10% is coming to the firm,
No matter what, and then they just.
depending on whether I'm a seller sub-agent or representing them as a buyer or designated or dual, that's how much I would get paid
We were talking
based
about
on
that
that.
outside a little bit, trying to figure out how that split would go, and to your point, it is based on the independent contract you have with the firm, regardless of who got the sale to who.
Yeah, all commission comes to the firm. How we split it up from there is policy. Y'all don't need to know none of that today. Independent contractor agreement, yeah.
So I mean, just like, on this question, like, so you can get help and you can pay that person out of your commission yourself if he helps you. But that's your prerogative pretty much at that point.
As long as
Like-
somebody
like
has
you
a
said.
license, they can get commission
Like
income.
you said, like we, you know, he's bringing me a seller that I need,
Yep.
but he doesn't have an agreement with them. He just knows he just knows somebody who's applicable for a house that I'm selling. Could he then say like, well, can you shoot me something for bringing this person that I think is going to be applicable to buy the house, and they buy the house?
So I can tell you,
Is that a
and
kickback?
I can tell you how referral fees work. Referral fees are the easiest
Referral
money
fees,
in real
okay.
estate. We call it mailbox money. It's great. I call you, I say, here's Joe Smith, here's his phone number, he's thinking about buying a house. That's all I have to give you, and a referral agreement that says if they buy, you will pay me a percentage or a flat fee or whatever I'm charging you of that gross commission.
It's a handoff, but you
It's a
get
handoff.
percentages.
Yeah, and it's really amazing because in many times, I used to build a business when I was not able to physically show. I would generate business online. I would get a name and a phone number. If somebody wanted to see a house, I'd call somebody. Can you show it? Great. Here they are. Pay me a referral fee when it closes. We have an agreement, and then,
Verbal?
yeah, it's a referral fee. And that can be in-house, same firm. That can be
Anybody.
different firms in the same area. That could be different firms in different states.
Yeah, because you're not part of the agency at that point.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things that you guys, as we progress with our business practices in this case, some of you may not want to be out showing and buying sellers. Some of you, by the way, if you have family, relatives, friends in areas, other parts of the country like California, so one of my past clients moved to California in San Francisco, where the average sales price is $975. I was so quick to ensure that I hooked him up with a realtor friend of another firm there who could help him buy, who in turn for his contact information mails me a referral fee based on what he purchases.
Wow.
I get more on a $900,000 referral fee than I do on a commission for selling a $200,000 house here. That's good. And I didn't do nothing. Gave him a name and number. So some people would choose to make a living off of referrals.
So we write people, right, and you say,
They have to have a license though.
according to all the information I looked up at the library, you are my distant cousin.
Yeah, yeah. And this could be anybody. It doesn't have to be a relative. It could be a friend. Anybody named
No, I
number that
just
you.
meant maybe they
But
have
both
more
parties
pride.
have to be licensed, the receiver
Yes.
and the
And so
sender.
these referral fees that we're talking about, referral fees are commission income. You cannot receive commission income unless you have a real estate license. So even though you're in another state, you still have to have a real estate license in that state for me to pay you a referral fee.
But you don't have to be, in your scenario, you didn't have to be licensed in California to receive it here.
Right.
You
I
just
could
have to
not
have a
go to
license here.
California and do anything.
Right,
They would do the transaction and mail my firm the referral
but
fee
you have to be
here.
licensed here.
Right. And on active status, not just have it, you actually have to keep it up. Yeah.
It doesn't just have to be money, right? It can be any sort of compensation.
Compensation varies, yeah, I mean, we're talking a lot of money, but it could be, compensation is a pretty broad term. Most of the time it is money because it runs through the firm.
Right.
So if someone's trying to give you something that can't go through your
Memberships don't go
firm,
through the firm.
it's a little harder. Yeah, the compensation is negotiable, and I'm using 10% just for round numbers. There's no set commission, there's no set fee, there's no standard commission. We can't even talk about that due to Sherman antitrust laws, which we'll get into. Point being, compensation is a relative term. It is whatever you are willing to, whatever you're worth, and you are able to receive as compensation. Or whatever your firm tells you you are worth. Yes, sir.
Does like your reputation, like sometime determine your compensation?
I mean, it could, yeah. I mean, if you are highly desirable, you could maybe, I mean, you can charge more, just like supply and demand, right?
Okay, that's just economic.
Yeah, supply and demand. So now, before we proceed, I want to recap. We have talked about types of agreements, right? Universal, general, special. General is property management, special is our buying selling agreements. We've then kind of drilled down and talked about the different types of agency agreement. Buyer agency agreement, seller agency agreement, dual agency agreement, designated, and this little sub-agent of the seller thing, right? Everybody's cool with that? Now, let's get specific to the actual agreements. So, there are many types of agreements. So let's start with the exclusive seller's agreement. Exclusive seller's agreement. First of all, let me harp on the difference between sellers and selling. That apostrophe shows ownership, right? The seller's agent. That is who? Homeowner shows ownership. Is the listing agent. The selling agent has no apostrophe, so there's no ownership yet. This is our buyer's agent. So do not confuse these terms because they're similar, mean different things. We, in most of our daily nomenclature, will say buyer agent or listing agent.
So why would you even use selling agent?
That would really get
Yeah, it is.
confusing.
It is confusing, and the main reason we will use these is because a lot of your agreements will reference it this way. Because in this case, we're talking about the exclusive seller's agreement. So who am I representing in this transaction?
Let's
So-
see.
The seller. Now, what's it mean to be exclusive?
Only one.
There you go. You guys have had relationships. You know how this exclusive relationship works. It's a very exclusive relationship. It's me and you, and no side hustles. Okay? Exclusive seller's agent. Now, here's the difference. And watch the vocabulary, because we're going to talk about a couple that sound similar. With an exclusive seller's agent, you owe them the loyalty, you are their advocate, you do keep their information confidential. Exclusive seller's agent. What happens with the expiration of an exclusive seller's agent? By the way, in this case, exclusive is one only. We're going to get in a couple of flavors of that. If the listing agent expires, what confidential information do we have to keep?
No.
Everything stays confidential until
They're your buyer, until you're their buyer
I
agent.
have somebody else whom I owe my allegiance to. Remember the exclusive buyer's agent. Now I have my allegiance. I'm being employed by the buyer. So if I'm the exclusive buyer's agent, I am now working for them. So you will be their advocate, you will loyal, and you will give them full disclosure of anything you know about the seller's information.
That's to be careful what you tell me now, because if I'm ultimately representing a buyer down the road, I can give it to them.
Correct.
Yeah. Or you went out of the seller's agreement, great, sign, all right, we're gonna let you go, but everything you told me up till now is you know, any buyer's information as well.
Yeah, and any information either client shares with you is confidential during the term of your agency agreement until you have another agent agreement with somebody else and that one's over. So if I have a listing agreement, all the information about the seller is confidential until that either ends or they fire me, still confidential until someone else hires me to be their buyer's agent against that property. And now I owe my allegiance to whom my new contract is with.
So you can't share confidential information with customers, only with a client you're in an agency agreement with.
Yes, and to restate his question, you cannot just go blabbering confidential information to customers because you know it. Oh, you should go buy that one. They're getting a divorce. Man, how's it going? Can't do that until I work for you. And then when I work for you, I have to give you any information that may help you purchase if I am your exclusive agent. So this is just another kind of an infographic of the agency thing. One firm, dual agent. It could be that the buyer and seller are at the same firm. The dual agent is the referee. They cannot advocate, they cannot coach, they have to keep everything confidential. They can prepare the offer, they can prepare the paperwork, they can keep the transaction on track, but as a dual agent, just strictly a dual agent, you are the referee. This is another infographic, and this is actually from your book for designated dual agents. So the lead comes in, the brokerage or the BIC has to designate. So either someone in the brokerage that has authorization, typically the broker in charge, has to take that lead, field that lead, and give it out. To designate a buyer's agent and a seller's agent who know nothing about each other. The goal is that whomever is doing this designation ensures that the buyer and seller are represented by folks that can coach them with no knowledge of the other side. Right?
It's not a top-down thing, because sometimes you don't find that out until you go in and see who has something listed, because you have a buyer agreement with your buyer and now you figure it out. So then you have to work your way up to the BIC to confirm that you can be a designated agent. Is that?
So ultimately, this is the desired flow, and whether it's I'm the buyer's agent and I found somebody I want to designate myself and I have to check to see if I can, it's still a little beyond the scope of where we're at. Ultimately, whomever is authorized to do the designation has to give the permission. So simplistically, fundamental level, the broker in charge is the one who does the designating. Therefore, all leads would go through the broker in charge to ensure that whomever is working with them in a designated agency situation is okay. Now, this, in real life, could be multiple people in the firm. I could have 15 people at my firm that are authorized per my policies to be the one to do the designating.
But when you say the way the lead flows, though, I mean what do you mean by that?
Because
Not that
the
top-down.
idea here is that this is a new buyer, this is a new seller. Whomever is doing the designating should vet them to make sure that whomever they are assigned with is not compromised. Now, what does happen is sometimes they get the lead, they have to then return it to make sure they're vetted properly and
Because it's not,
okay to do that.
okay, because the property is irrelevant, it's just what they know about each other's buyer and seller, not even the agent or the property.
Right.
So you typically try to figure that out before you even have a specific property.
Yeah, and that's why if we can
And
get them
that's-
early and often, we don't have to worry about do we know or not.
Yeah.
I fielded them. I know you don't know them because they called me.
Got it.
Yeah. I mean, did you have a question?
You answer part of it.
Okay, let me.
Okay,
and
so-
maybe as well.
When they sign, and I'm talking about a buyer.
Yeah.
Buyer signs a dual agent agreement. Is it in writing from Jump Street? If it's dual agency or if it's designated? And the situation that I'm looking at is, okay, I'm fine with dual agency. You're going to show another person's listing, but now it's true dual agency. No, it's your listing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm not at all comfortable with dual agency. I love your brother.
Yep.
You got to designate somebody else in your office.
Certainly a prerogative. That's why we go over this brochure to let you know you have options. Because the
Yeah.
general consumer, if you call me and it's my listing, and I'm like, cool, I can represent you as a dual agent, and you're like, cool, that's great. You think I can coach you? Until I've had this conversation, I cannot coach you because I am one agent, one listing, serving two masters, so to speak, right? The buyer and the seller. I can't answer to both of you.
Yeah.
I call a fair game, but you think I can. Just like the age-old people used to call the selling agent thinking they were getting somebody to help them. So we have this conversation. Now, in his prerogative, in that capacity, when we have that conversation, he can say, you know, I like that. I need some representation. Sorry that you're listing. I need somebody else who can coach me. Can you or your broker in charge, whomever has the ability to designate, give me somebody else from your firm?
Designate me a buyer's agent.
Or I'm going to go unrepresented. You represent the seller. I'll represent myself. And that's an option,
Yeah.
right? So they have options. And our goal is never to tell them what to do. Just lay out the options. It's a buffet, folks. What you want to eat.
So it's not as though they would have to be let out of the buyer's agency agreement because their agreement is with
The firm.
brokerage, not with Joe Blow.
Just a different
Exactly.
person is gonna represent.
Yep. As a agent at the firm, you are binding the firm to the agreement. Does not necessarily bind you to the agreement.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That makes it easier to understand.
Does that help?
Yeah.
So this is fun, right? Who doesn't love some good agency? You're like, I am done with this. You are not done
This is harder
with
than
this.
This is harder than the legal stuff.
This is hard, and honestly, this is like we were talking about one of the most tested and most confused topics, and you guys are you're following along pretty well. Yes, sir.
So like, if it's, let's say it flows the other way, like instead of coming from it goes straight from like the perspective to, like you say, to the seller.
Yeah.
Like, the seller's agent.
Yeah.
Prospective seller's agent. Can they just look on the MLS and see who's representing that client, or see if they are represented before they even go any further, or is that something that you have to dig a little deeper? Like, where's the first place you go to find who's representing?
Yeah, how you gonna know?
Yeah,
Well,
how do you
well, ultimately, we're going to know who's the listing agent first and foremost, because the house is listed for sale.
Okay.
So we know who
If
our
it's with
listing
your
agent
firm.
and who the firm is.
Okay,
If
gotcha.
it's with our firm, we know we probably are looking at some form of a duel.
Just
If it's
be
not
right
with
on
our
the
firm, who cares? We're buyer's agents. Let's go sell something.
That's gonna be right on the MLS as soon as I look at it.
Yes, absolutely. Always in MLS, you will know who the listing firm is. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good point. All right, so designated dual agency, we talked a little bit about this. In the designated agency, you restore the ability to coach. That's the intention. By the way, designated dual agency is a North Carolina thing. It is not court tested either, by the way. It hasn't gone to court for someone to challenge it. This was our attempt to restore the ability for the buyer and seller to operate under the same firm with coaching.
Well, what could they ever really challenge? The fact that you really and truly didn't know anything about each other's buyer and seller, right? That would be the core issue.
It would, and it's while it has not been challenged, it has not been challenged because it's pretty solid.
Yeah.
Because if it's done correctly, right? Because designated agency, if that's your bag, you can muck it up real
They
easy.
do it well.
You got it. And who's the responsible person?
You.
Broker in charge, no matter what. Broker in charge.
So it'll be his fault for.
Always
whatever
gonna-
happens. It's always his fault.
Everything's broker in charge's fault. Okay. So that's the intention of the designated agency. So then this is the case exactly what we went over on page 175 or 176. This is exactly the scenarios we read through.
Yep.
So what if the seller said no at the time of listing? Can they agree later? Yes. Both parties must consent and the firm must practice dual agency. So again, it depends on the buyer agency agreement. If the buyer agency agreement is oral, they can flip the switch to allow it orally. If it is in writing, we have to get written consent, meaning both parties have to, in writing, authorize dual agency.
And the firm doing it in practice just means you have procedures and policies to do it and you are okay doing it. That's not a legal thing, that's just a decision that the firm makes to either do it or not.
Right, yeah, and by the way, a firm can decide, hey, do we even want to do this dual thing? There are some firms that say, we don't do dual agency.
They're too small.
We are a listing firm only. There are firms that we are buyer agents only. Majority of our marketplace has both. A lot of them have both. Now, whether they practice dual or designated, that's an in-house decision, and you wouldn't know unless you worked there. So, agency and firm types are where we are going to probably pick up on Monday. So, a little bit of overload today.